Thank you for joining the Healing Collective Live, where we help you to heal mentally, physically, and spiritually. I have with me today the fantastic Nicole Harshaw, and I don't know if she's changed her last name yet. I did see that big rock on her finger, but I am so excited to have her here. Nicole, how are you doing? How's it going? What is new with you?
Oh, wow. This almost sounds like three questions in one.
It-
Wow. I am doing well. I will start there. I do not have any complaints. Life is busy and I embrace every one of those moments because I create them. So I am not complaining, Tony.
how we met was through education. So you worked in the education field, you worked in theater, and now you work in mental health counseling. So considering all of those, how has it shaped your holistic approach?
Yeah,
And specifically addressing issues like trauma and
yeah,
self-esteem, because you
yeah.
said you work with athletes, and I think some people don't think or don't realize that those people who are in the field, those athletes, they deal with self-esteem issues as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, for sure. You know, what's interesting, you're right, because when we met as teachers, our
Hmm.
students were people first before they wore that student hat. And everyone in those spaces may not see or perceive, our students that way. I like to call them tiny humans, but not so tiny because a lot of them were taller than we were. But they are learning who they are. And there's a lot of external stimuli that goes with that. So day to day, you, me, others in those capacities really had an opportunity endlessly to show up for them in a different way and learn what that looked like, from one student to the next. But, I like what I'm hearing you ask me, and that's the holistic approach, because as educators, we don't have a script. We have the lesson plans and all those things, but we didn't have a script for what the kids were going to bring into those spaces. Instead of learning about what was in the books, they were learning, life of hard knocks in their spaces that were not so safe. And that combined with, working now with athletes, but it's more of a collegiate level, at the end of the day, the commonality is that people go through things.
Right.
And it's not a matter of it's going to harm one person differently than another in terms of the feelings and the emotions on the emotion wheel are all the same. It just gets executed and responded to differently, based on age and how the brain is developed and the actual details of what they're going through. So holistically, I listen first. And I always tell any individual sitting in front of me, I am not the expert of you. It might go without saying, but I am here for what you need, and we get to collaborate and figure that out together. And so,
Hmm.
right from the onset of the conversation, it is to be holistic.
Hmm.
All the interventions that are research based are going to come. They're going to be applicable based on, the diagnosis and the duration and frequency of the symptoms and whatever they've been distinctively dealing with for a long time. But the holistic approach is always going to be part of that conversation so that I can be organic and altruistic in what I say and how I
Okay.
listen. So, yeah.
Okay. So 13 years you were a social science educator. How is this now informing your practice? The work you did with kids, or is it, or?
Social science is history.
Mm.
It's history. I remember when I would stand in front of the white dry erase board, I'd say, you have his story and his story, and then you have her story and their story and our story. Everyone has a story, and it's the one that doesn't end. You have chapters and unwritten text that we have not even yet encountered. So as a social science major, I wanted to go to law school. I was in law school thinking I'm going to become the next Supreme Court justice. I'm going to make some marks and milestones. And I'm so happy and grateful that the journey took me in a different direction. My path, I believe, has met many more milestones to do the things with social science, degree seeking information. It's people, it's humanities, it's studying what history has done And hopefully, even when it does repeat itself, because there are times we know it will, that we turn out the responses to get a different outcome when we approach those same historical narratives. They do not have to have the same outcome in the exact same way. So I don't really use the educational piece unless it presents
That's
itself.
what I was trying to get at. Do
Yeah.
you okay?
Yeah. Unless it just kind of organically comes up. And then I think
Hmm.
just because I am who I am in those moments, but really genuinely to be very candid as a therapist, I don't want to be a teacher. I will use psychoeducational information, but I'm
Right.
not teaching. I'm learning, I'm collaborating, I'm building rapport. I'm sometimes just giving therapeutic silence and letting someone be
Mm,
heard, letting them not feel victimized to their own thoughts and internalizations, right? So it's not about teaching, it's about being. And I don't have to
mm,
solve their problems. And I remind
mm,
people all the time, you're not coming in irreparable. This is not a broken situation. You have been through some things. And we don't have to
mm.
dig all the things up and approach all the things, but sometimes just find a way to help you function in a healthier way. And then as you are strong enough, then you get to focus on some of those things so your history doesn't repeat itself. That's the educational piece,
Right, right,
right?
right, right.
As I listen to myself saying those things out loud and you're in my discourse right now, it makes me think of the parable, as cliche as it sounds. You give a man a fish, you
What
feed him for a
parable?
day,
Oh, okay,
right?
okay.
You teach him how to
Right. Teach
fish,
them how to fish. Right.
he feeds himself for a lifetime. So I don't want to be a fisherman. I want to be one of the providers so people can find their own way of feeding themselves. Yeah.
Now, particular with women, how
Mm.
do you help them? Because you do a lot of work with women. How do you help women in this day and age to be fishermen or fisher people?
Mm.
Or how do you help them?
I love that
What do you do
question.
specifically?
I love that question. Honestly, Tony, it depends on what they're going through when they sit down in front of me,
Okay.
right? To be very straightforward, if a woman is a
Okay.
woman of color, I'm going to capitalize on all those moments that we sit in that same space with similar privileges because
Mm,
it's a privilege to be a woman of color. It's a privilege to be a woman. And I'm not even going to circumvent that reality for myself.
right.
Right. And so I utilize that commonality to say, there's strength even in the moments that you don't feel you can find it. There's power in being a woman with color. There's power in the jazz of your voice and the movement of your steps, right? And maybe you got lost in that because of, and this is where the ellipsis comes in. To your question, if they come and sit in front of me because of domestic violence, those
Right.
are real moments.
Real
And
moments.
privileges do not have a whole lot to do with that. Self-esteem issues, generational patterns, historical trauma, complicated
Hmm.
matters, tumultuous medical conditions and circumstances.
Hmm.
I've had women that have been in front of me, and I cannot tell you the countless number of times that the excuses, regardless of one person knowing another person, render the same. I fell, I walked into a door, it's okay. It's not, I did something wrong. It's the script from one person to the next who have never met one another is
It's
always
the
the same
same.
verbiage,
It's the
right?
same.
So I show up for them and teach them how to show up for themselves without
I
judgment,
like that.
without criticism, openness, and allowing them to have an opportunity to recognize their worth.
Hmm.
Women who have, lived longer than me, I show up for them. I'm in that space because I have a mom who's older than me. So it's a privilege to know that their circumstances are ones that are not foreign to me. It's not my life. I can't speak it and live it for them, but I know how to
Hmm.
listen to it with both ears, the therapist one and the human one, right?
Hmm.
The women that show up in front of me that are white American, that are Latina, I don't walk
Hmm.
in their shoes, but they do. And so I'm willing to learn. And that's where the reciprocity of what they need becomes what I get to learn so that I know
Hmm.
how to then provide what they need.
How
Yeah.
do you decide what approach to use? And do you find that some approaches just work better with women who
Yeah.
have gone through abuse?
The approach I decide to use,
Hmm.
sometimes cut and dry, is based on the diagnosis.
Okay.
If the
Right.
diagnosis says these are the approaches, the modality to use, and I'm specialized in that, I'm not doing superfluous, surfaced, textbook kind of, hey, go journal, hey, go. That's just not who I want to be in that space and
Okay.
be comfortably and be authentic. The interventions can easily start out with, do you need, your cognitive behavioral therapy? How you think influences how you feel, and that motivates, how you behave, think, act, do, what's going on, what's next. However, the interventions could easily be like a couple days ago, I did yoga therapy in session with one of my teenagers. She didn't expect that, but digging deep verbally wasn't getting her to a place where she wasn't having those emotional deregulation moments outside of therapy. So we put down a couple of yoga mats and we got on the floor and we stretched and we moved and that promotes the evocation of those tears, right? So a young woman might need that. She came in for cognitive behavioral therapy support, but she's thinking, she's moving, she's sensory, she's doing, and then she's tapping into, now how do I get to talk about it? So the modality could be, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It could be, ACT, the acceptance and commitment, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. Could be a number of those, right? And yet the interventions could be empty chair, could be
That's a powerful one.
one of my favorites, right? It could be role reversal.
Okay.
So I find I think your second part, or correct me when I'm wrong.
Okay.
I pinpoint what the person needs, but it's their symptoms and it's their behaviors, because we don't treat the diagnosis. That's just to kind of DSM-5 yourself into the moments of, okay, this is what's applicable. But when we start peeling back those Russian nesting dolls and we're getting to the core, we need to be able to be creative and open up those places where those wounds are not so closed shut. So I let those behaviors and those symptoms talk to me on what interventions are necessary. And I'm willing to go get certified in something if my client needs it, because that's what's necessary to help them in their moments of not being in therapy for the rest of their life. And then two, just with those interventions, if the intervention I notice is not working, we go back to the drawing board. We go back to the basic initial assessment and we see what those real prominent symptoms were. So a lot of duration, how long you've been dealing with this, how often does it show up? When does it get better? When does it get worse? And that changes from woman to woman and man to man, because I do have a lot of male clients as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this podcast is more geared towards women. Yes, I deal with men, but for the most part, because I'm a woman and I have a heart for women, I just try to cater it to that.
I'm all for that.
Now, you've spoken at faith-based conferences. And spirituality and mental health. I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to go into it. I want to hear your view. Like, when you think about the stigma that's attached to mental health and in the Christian community, how do you navigate that?
Honor someone's faith-based belief principles, to be very straightforward. I don't have to sit in the same space with their belief system, even if it is synonymous or has some commonalities. If it
wait, go back. What does that mean? You don't have to sit in the same space.
I don't have to, gently push that as a primary coping skill, or agree or disagree on their faith-based belief principles. I allow that space to be interrupting myself if they come in with that internal monologue that their values and their faith-based belief principles are something that they use, but they waver on it, or it's the one coping mechanism they naturally use and it helps them feel better, then I'm therapeutic in those moments. So I can be ethical and genuine in what I'm doing. So to stay neutral to that point, if it's a coping mechanism, then we utilize that. It's a coping mechanism. So I could be gently and respectfully confrontational. As a faith-based believer, when does it not help you that you pray or that you read, your religious text, and it's not giving you the outcome that you're seeking? And it's not a negative, it's a respectful inquiry. Like, when is it helpful and when is it not helpful? When is there lapse? Because a lot of times, and I know we're not really going to get into it, I recognize when you said that, but I'm just going to stick my toe in the water just a little bit.
Go ahead.
We won't wade in the water, but we'll stick our toe in the water. Okay. So, a lot of times when someone brings up their faith in natural conversation, and this is where I gracefully cheat, but it's because that's my job. I'm trauma certified, so I'm tracking the eye movement. right? I'm tracking the nonverbal mannerisms, the countenance on the face will shift. Those little quirks or fidgetiness of anxiety will show up in their phalanges, or their foot will move, or they'll shift in their seat, right? So I'll stop. What was that? Would be my question to them. What happened?
For a minute there, I thought you were talking to me. I'm like,
Right. What happened to you? And
okay.
that's as natural as it comes. Because, see, you thought I was talking with you. I give them a chance to hear that. And I don't have to talk endlessly. I remind them you're going to increasingly hear your voice more than
Mm,
mine. So when I see something, it's what happened just now. I noticed when I said dot dot dot, you something in you changed. What do you think that was? Right? And where I'm going with that is oftentimes, and not always, but
right.
oftentimes if someone brings up their faith, but they're sitting in therapy, I want them to hear that those two things live in the same space. Something is working and sticking my toe in the water, something else is not working.
Right.
Something is helpful when it is, and something
Mhm.
is continuously unhelpful with their faith. What is it? Where is that? And again, respectfully to you, me, and any viewer, I can tell you that a lot of times, more often than not, there is some level of, I follow this faith and I'm not sure
Mhm.
why I believe this. Why? Well, I've done this since I was, well, my parents are,
Mhm.
well, I don't know. But that's their safe space. And this again is where there's no judgment, truthfully. And there's no
Right.
harm in exploring what and what is not out loud so they can get to the optimal version of who they are. And
Mhm.
women need to know they are allowed to question themselves, because that's the person that needs them more than anyone else. She needs you to show up. That's what I tell my
Mm.
women. She needs you to listen to her. She
I
needs
like
you to
that.
write her that letter. She needs you to hear that she's hurting. She needs you. She needs you more than anybody else needs you. What are you willing to do for her?
Right. Wow, that seems like a central thread with a lot of the therapists I've talked to so far, is that for women, they don't seem to show up for themselves. And just you saying what you just said, telling them that she needs you to show up. I just think that is critical. I think it's a good thing to do with people who are coming to you for counseling, to say, yeah, she needs you, because too often
Mm,
we go and we run ourselves raggedy because someone else needs us,
mhm,
and we neglect ourselves. So
mhm.
that was good. That's good.
And that's a big word that you just pulled out. We
Mhm.
neglect ourselves. And you know what's
Mhm.
interesting, Tony? A lot of times women don't realize that they are self neglecting. It
Mm.
becomes such a habit forming behavior
I know.
before it even becomes
I got the t-shirts.
I
Yes, I
burned my
know.
shirt a long time ago. I don't fold it up and put it in my drawer anymore. It
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
somewhere
Mhm.
providing thread for the fishes, but I like my fish.
Mm.
It is something to hear a woman not realize. And when I say hear it, it sounds like this.
Nothing. Is
Because
that what you're getting
when in the inside, when that little shift happens, when they realize, you could, even the criers who cry out loud in that moment of self-realization will cry silently, because it is something to come to a moment of aha and realize, whoa. When a woman tells another woman she needs you, what would you say to your younger self? And again, depending on what they're going through in their story, I could easily get specific, and oftentimes do. So you're sitting in front of me and you're 64. What would you say to your 19-year-old self? What questions did you have that you still have not yet answered? Because we do hold on to things, right? So, and when they start talking, and I said, okay, so respectfully, let's stop. I really want to encourage you to speak from the heart and not the hip. Sometimes it's speak from the hip and not the heart.
Mm.
And I wonder if you know what I
Mm.
mean when I say that.
Yes, I believe I do. You
This is
off
emotion,
like off the
right? But the hip, let's get our fingers dirty. Let's
mm.
get our hands in the soil, right? And dig up that dirt. Let's speak from the hip, because how we move as a woman shows up in how we move in those spaces. Our gait, our walk,
But
our
go back to that. Talk about that again. How we move as a woman
mm,
shows up in how we
how
You
we
said,
move in our gait, how we sit, how we, if you've
mm,
ever seen a woman, you and I are both therapists, so we've
mm,
been educators, so we've seen the different ages and stages, and right. So
mm,
when someone is traumatized, think now, even in your mindset, how a woman sits when she's gone through trauma. Think of
mm,
how a woman sits when she's had those moments where she's had to survive in risky moving behavior. So she's had to make some decisions to keep it real for herself, keep the money in her pocket, but really make things happen. And that's not something she might, she may or may not be proud of it, because she's a woman about what she needs to get done. And
right.
yet she moves and she glides and she shifts through life differently versus maybe a little girl who is a young, tiny woman, human woman, and she's been
Mm,
traumatized, how she moves, versus a young lady who's starting college for the first time and she's proud of herself, how she moves. We move differently as women, and it
mm.
shows up in how we move physically as a person. So I
Do you
approach that.
think that's because of the trauma? You said we move differently
Mhm,
as women,
mhm.
and you think that's because of the trauma that we've gone through?
I think it's the
Is that
trauma. While everything is not trauma, I think it could be trauma, real trauma, infused feelings and movement. And I think also traumatizing things that we go through that we even might do to ourselves, right? So if we're neglecting ourselves, kind of circling back around to that you and I talked about, moments ago, or
right?
if we're self-esteem challenged, our worthiness
Mm,
has been compromised, the darting
mm,
of the eyes, the inability to speak with confidence and with clarity so that other people know I do believe in what I'm saying and I do believe in
mm,
myself. And when that is diminished, she meaning a woman, may move differently. And I
mm.
mean that
Wow.
physiologically as well as holistically, soulfully.
Okay.
There's
Now,
different
you
move.
just said something that struck a nerve in me because a friend of mine said recently, "You're walking with a limp." And I
Mm,
was like, "What?" She said, "You're walking with a limp." And she wasn't talking about physically. She was talking about my movements and like my how you talked about gliding and I thought, "Oh, wow." She said, "Yeah." She said, "You're moving differently than what how I've known you to move before. That you now yes, you're out of that place and you're healed, but now
mhm.
you're walking with a limp." And I'm telling you, Nicole, that
Mm,
even now, that's kind of hits me differently. And even
mhm,
listening to you talk about what you just said, it's like so people can see, even though you're figuring, I'm healed, I'm doing what, but people who
mhm,
know you, they can see where
mhm.
there's been a shift in energy, there's been a shift in how you present. And
Yes.
I thought, wow, I'm walking with the limp.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
So still healing. You're welcome. And that limp, though, is empowering because when you become increasingly self-aware, you want to do something about that limp.
Hmm.
What are you still precluded to that's kind of has you anchored to something that you're still getting through, you're still clutching or holding on to. So when I hear you say that, if I may be so presumptuous as to delve into that without highlighting your business.
I'll take it out. So go
Okay.
go ahead.
It that's good. It sounds like reluctance
Mm, mhm,
and even wanting to be careful,
mhm, mhm,
uncertainty,
mhm.
without it being intentional to be, you're not in disillusionment, but you're figuring it out. And that
Yeah,
means that your movement may not be as bold and
that's what she
as,
was talking about.
you're not squared away on all things. So it's like, and this is not diminishing your value in any shape, way, or form, but it's like a
Okay.
bird when they could still fly with a clipped wing, but they're
Mm,
flying different.
right.
Right. And so we have women that can still get up and do all the things they do. And, we have comedians that tell these stories. We have
Mhm,
our Maya Angelos that tell these stories. We have people in the world that have spoken on, what a woman, still I rise moments, right? And
mm,
we love to
mhm,
hear that because it gives us the energy that we want to have. When we hear Maya say that, and I hope she doesn't mind wherever she is in her space, that I'm calling her by her first name, like she and I have been down like two flat tires for years. But when we hear Maya say, and still I rise,
Still I rise.
we feel that. It's almost like our shoulders just kind of
It's right. I
line
was
up.
just about to say it's like, yes,
We start
I
getting
stand up straighter
I
and
know.
still I rise. Yes.
Right. It's like, okay, you don't realize I'm slouching, right?
Right.
I was on Channel 4 this morning and my son
Mhm.
was in the studio and he was standing behind the camera, kind of off in the cuts. And I never like to look at anyone. I'm trying to get ready for what I need to do. And I'm trying to get into all of that, those moments and make sure my words are straight, wah, wah, and I happened to look over at him and he did this. And it was like somebody had me on a string
Stand up.
and I was sitting and I'm thinking,
Mm.
when he did that, I realized I was like this. There was my limp.
Mm.
I'm doing it. I've been doing it for 2.5 years. I'm going out into the community. But every time I go to do it, and I say this even as a therapist, I forget I'm already there. I've already arrived, but I'm still, and he was like, and I went as if he was, a conductor.
Mm.
And I was like, and he was like, I was like, and do you know, I sat that way the whole interview and it was odd until it wasn't. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is actually comfortable.
Mm. Mm.
But I can distinctively remember when it would not have been. And just like an addict, I would have relapsed back into that
Wow.
place because it's physiological. To your earlier question, it's holistic. It's how we move. And when we're not mindful, we go back to it because that's the
Yes.
foundation we allowed ourselves to build, right? It's like when I think it was in Dreamgirls, when the character of Beyonce, she said, I follow the voice you think you gave to me.
Mm.
Talk to that young woman who needs you because she's still in there.
Mm.
So maybe I did get a little bit from there, but it's still my voice. So when someone is sitting in front of me, I do not want to take away their voice. Not in that space. I want them to hear it. So if it's a limp in their voice, if their voice is crouched down, if their voice is overly bold because they feel like the louder they get, the more they're going to be heard, right? The more emotionally deregulated they are, the more people will be scared. So they don't have to reveal their voice. We're going to cut and dice and slice all of that up. What do you want your voice to sound like and why? Answer that question.
Mm.
You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I do. So, what strategies would you recommend for those women
The
who are
first,
trying to either find their voice or reclaim their voice?
as cliche as it sounds, the first strategy I would recommend for them would be to write it out, to have some designated time where they sit down and they ask themselves the very real question: who am I? What do I need? What am I willing to do? Because if the willingness is not there, then the cliche response to your question is go talk with a counselor. But not if this is going to be harder than they think. This is part of this, right? It's a part of it. But the willingness is a part of it too. And that's why, and I know you already know this, when we ask someone, okay, so why are you here in therapy? And we go through all of those assessment questions, right? At some point we ask them about barriers. And it's so interesting, without oversharing, I'll say in very, very real brevity, I had someone ask me today, I don't understand the question. And I said, oh, I love that you said that.
What was their response?
And she was like, why do you love that? Why? And I said, oh, because you're listening to yourself. And you were real enough to let me know that you didn't understand the question. I love that. I love that because that truthfulness is what's going to help you learn more about who you are. Certainly, you absolutely, anytime you need to, get to admit when you don't get it. That is the first step. And that's a stepping stool you're standing on. I didn't give that to you. You came in the door with that. She's like, well, I don't usually ask why. But this time you did though. And I love that too. So there are the barriers. So what's the barrier? Oh, now I understand the question, she said. So the barrier is something that holds me back. If that's your definition, sure, let's go with that, right? And so then as we continue to talk, it came down to the point of me saying, the hindrances are things that keep you from using and listening to yourself. Then out came more of that, right? Because when we come to therapy, when we come to places where we want to work on ourselves, The strengths are there, but the barriers are part of it. And it all lives in the same place, in the parasympathetic nerve of who we are. And it comes out when you're angry, when you're hungry, when you're joyful, when you're scared and nervous, when you're excited and exuberant. It all lives in the same place. That's why when someone says, "Are you angry?" and you're like, "No, I'm thinking about something." How did they get that confused? Because they do not know you the way you know you. So as a woman, we get to learn about who we are without stopping. That cessation should not be a part of the process. The movement forward should always be the goal, and moving through. Never
Yeah,
arrive, always arriving.
I think most people don't know themselves. You said they
Mm,
don't know you. You gave a great example of someone saying, "Are you angry?" And
mm,
your response is, "No, I'm not angry. I'm whatever." But
mhm,
I think most people don't know themselves that well.
mhm,
They really don't. They don't know themselves that well. So how, as a therapist, how do you help specifically women? How do
mhm.
you help women find themselves or learn themselves or even listen to
Yeah.
their inner voice?
I ask a lot of open-ended questions, to be very frank with you. Sometimes I catch them off guard and I say, "What's your face showing me right now?" And I remember someone
Mm,
telling me recently, "I don't know. I'm not looking in a mirror." I said, "What if mirrors did not exist? I mean, do you know what you look like from the inside?" I don't know how to answer that question. I said, what do you feel on your face? What do you feel? If I mirrored your facial expression right now and I just tried to make a face, I said, "What do I look like?" "You look pissed off." I said, "Are you pissed off?" She was like, "No." I said, "So why does your face look like that?" I'm showing you what I mean, I could be mimicking it wrong though.
mhm,
So,
mhm.
her responses were kind of like, "Oh, you know what? Oh, you know what? People have always, I used to hear that." How many times have we heard it? "I used to hear that when
Hear
I
that,
was
right?
young. My mama used to tell me all the time." I said, "So what are you mad about?" She said, "I'm not." "Well, wait, well,"
Why does your face look right?
and then as she thought about it, made her tearful. She was like,
Mm,
"I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt." And then as we talked, it came back to trauma. And then it's to your question, when was the last time you think you did not have that facial expression? That's the same way of asking the cliche therapy question of, when was the last time you were happy? When was
right,
the last
right,
time you accomplished something? I say,
right.
when was the last time you maybe had a different facial expression? And what would that have been? Or pick somebody's facial expression you've seen and describe it for me. What do you think they were feeling? So it
Mhm.
gets them identifying the baseline versus what they, where they function, what they might be showing to the world, and yet I still remind them it's not about what other people see and whether they're right or wrong. It's you feeling
Right.
those facial
You
muscles.
feeling
I said, go
mhm.
ahead and smile. And when they do that, do you feel that? Do you think you're showing what looks like happiness? Well, yeah, because I'm smiling. But you're not looking in a mirror. That's what you said about 5 minutes ago. There's no mirror here. So how do you know that you're smiling? Well, the corners of my mouth. Right. So when you're not smiling, what do you feel? And then of course you use some tools like the emotions wheel, or, I have videos that I show women that's a very powerful video. It's actually, Tony, a commercialized video for a skincare product, but it literally shows a forensic sketch artist doing different women and how they describe themselves, right? And then
Mhm,
he
mhm.
gets somebody else in the lobby to befriend them, and he brings them in separately and has them, describe the person that they were with whom they were speaking. And then he brings back in the woman and he says, "Look at these two pictures. This was your description of what you see in yourself. And this is a description of what somebody who just met you sees." And
Well, I would
every
like to see that.
Oh, I will send it to you. Every
Okay.
single woman described herself, from a Black American woman to a white woman, a young woman, an older woman, a middle-aged woman, a woman of a different ethnicity, and their sketches of themselves show the downtrodden, the here we go, right? The downcasted eyes, the body is not okay, the hair looks, there's no brightness, it's dark and gloomy. And the picture
Mhm.
that just a casual observer who literally just met them described them as was bright, and color of their eyes were more appropriate and apparent. It was more
Oh, wow.
evidentiary, where the women saw themselves as not good looking at all, not healthy, not
Mhm.
joyful. That's coming from the inside. That's
Right.
the physiological movement when a woman is not okay and she stopped listening to her voice a long time ago. It's the voice that others thought they gave to us, but we had it before we met them.
Mhm.
Because this sketch artist video, these individuals saw the voice, but they didn't. They put on their best imposter and they met with this person and they did their shoulders, and that was what was there. But the other stuff is there too. The hungry and the angry and the tired and the joyful, it's all coming out. And so, to the awareness, to what you and I are talking about, is build the awareness. Be willing to, I say to a woman, ask yourself the hard questions, because the
Mhm.
person who needs, you don't need anyone telling you who you are.
Right. That's what I'm getting at.
It's supposed to come from you. No one should be able to walk up to you and tell you more about you than you already know about yourself.
Yes.
And that's okay
Yes.
if you don't know all the things. And yet you get to ask yourself those open-ended questions, right? What do
Mhm.
you need? What are you willing to do for yourself? And what do you want that to look like? How do you know when it's okay and when it's not okay? When your no is a word and not a statement, how much is it helpful for you? So when you tell someone you cannot do something or you choose not to do something, it is not a two-letter word. It is a
Mm.
statement. No, I cannot do that for you.
Complete sentence.
No people pleasing in that no. That no is,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Complete sentence. I think Oprah
Complete.
said yes.
And it has a period at the end of it. There is no semicolon. It's done.
Right. Right.
And to be comfortable with that, though, because a lot of women do not know how to say no comfortably
Yes. Yes.
because they're
I
worried
agree
about
with
the other
that
shoe dropping.
totally. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, last question before we wrap up. So now you've worked in schools and now you are a licensed mental health counselor. You're also working on your family therapist, the marriage and family therapist licensure as well. Now, going from your work in schools, how do we help the schools? Because my time in the school system, I was like, these babies need some help. So now that you have the training, in your view, what do schools need? How can we help our children to thrive, not just survive? Because I think
Mm.
schools right now, public education is in a survival mode. So how do we help our schools to thrive with the continuing mental health challenges that we see our kids are bringing?
This is twofold. And since I walked out of the classroom, I have never not thought about that question. And
Mhm.
so that's a very real one. And to be very
Mhm.
straightforward with you, it's one that I never completely have
Okay.
the answer to. I
Okay.
have distinctively had a lot of thoughts about it though, Toni.
Mhm. Me too.
And that's just power for the course, right?
Mhm.
Believe it or not, one angle is to start with the adults.
Okay. Okay.
You know as well as I that an educator is overrun, burned out, and to put it simply, accustomed to falling into the same cycle every day that they need to exist in those spaces. Now, that does not define every teacher
I
at
know.
all,
I
and it
know.
does not define every person's motivation, but I believe that there should be some kind of initiative where teachers have XYZ number of free counseling something. And I know, there's the EAP and all of those things, and there's a guidance counselor, and the
Right.
guidance counselors, their hands are full.
Right.
We have a common friend who their hands are full. There's nothing on the plate for them to be a counselor, which is so unfortunate.
Right.
So we won't
Right.
rabbit hole ourselves down that one in the ground.
Hmm.
The adults
So
get
you say
to have
address the
some
adults
support
first.
because they're going into those spaces. Interrupting myself, there probably is at least one educator in your life. I know there's one in mine where I could literally remember the name of the educator, maybe even first and last. I remember what they taught. I can picture the classroom in my mind. It's
Hmm.
sensory. I remember the teacher that was not okay with me. And I did not like them. And I was third grade and I remember like it was yesterday. And I hope
Okay.
they stopped teaching years ago because they had no business in the classroom, right?
Okay.
But I remember that teacher that stayed after with me when things were hard when I was in high school, walked me through things, cried with me, sat with me, made sure I had lunch, provided safe space for me. And I wish her well every day of her life, right? So I say that to say our educators need support. They need therapeutic, genuine counseling support. And it should be mandatory that there's some kind of mental assessment before they step into those spaces, and then something midway. We need to make sure that these are safe people we're putting in the classroom with our vulnerable population,
Yeah.
children.
Yes.
Our children deserve to have the adult in their space be someone who is checking in on themselves and listening to their voice. And to that end, in healing conversations in this space, majority of the educators are women.
Women. Yeah.
So when those women go into the classroom with hurt and domestic violence at home and financial hardships and trauma from their own childhood and sexual abuse and sexual inequities and boundary issues and emotional deregulation, substance abuse issues, you name it, they're putting that energy in their voice movement
Mm-hmm.
into our children. That becomes a foundation that is also part of our children's growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of that is to make sure that these programs that we have in place for mindfulness and relaxation
Yeah.
and like the classes that I grew up on, and I don't mean to sound archaic, but where's the
What?
where are the self-help classes for them to learn how to manage finances, for children to learn
Okay.
that, to
Okay.
learn how to listen to their bodies, to learn what it means to make decisions in social situations, how to interview. We start some of these things in high school. However,
Right.
in middle school, even in elementary, higher up, coming to that fourth and fifth grade, I said third grade in my own disclaimer, that's a foundation also.
Yeah.
Right? We teach kids, so many other things than that when they're our own children before they even reach VPK. So
Right.
this can be a foundation for us to go in and have genuine certified mental health empowerment classes
I
for
like
our
that.
children.
Let's do it.
Have you put my private practice down? And that becomes part of their foundation also. We have kids that are in daycare centers that are learning another language so they can also learn mental health movement. We have yoga for kids. Take yourself into a crab. Okay, now be a squid. Now be an octopus. Now be a cloud. It's mental health. That's
Mm.
sensory movement, right? When a child is having a panic attack and they're in third grade, what are we not doing well? We're doing something, but what are we not doing that's well for that child? A panic attack is not something that can kill you unless you fall and hit your head, right? We know
Right.
that there's
Right.
something else in the
Right.
background going wrong, but the gist of a panic attack is your body's talking with you. So we need to learn to listen to the voice of our body. And we can teach that from the beginning, to your question. And to the adults, we can continue to make sure that's part of their up training. And I'm not talking about a workshop in the afternoon.
Yeah. No.
I'm talking about really getting in there and making sure that they're not overrun and burned out, and cycling them through something that is a genuine movement for a retreat, taking them away from being mentally paralyzed and burned out and exhausted to being joyful that they stepped into something so absolutely amazing as to carve out the educational movement of young minds. And most of those educators, I say again, are women. And I'm not disregarding the men. I'm not disregarding any other identity. I'm saying this is what we're talking about. And that
Right.
healing
Right.
conversation with women gets to continue to happen, especially in those spaces, because we all go through some kind of educational process into adulthood. So that's where we start. We anchor ourselves to the root. So the root grows fruitful in a way that can allow the person to, back to the fish, feed themselves. And that's how we teach our women to be fishermen, fisher women,
Right. I know. Because we adding man.
fisher women. Right.
Yes. Fisher women. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the science of the social. And that's what I took away with from my education and my degree into what I do now. It's the socialization of who we are. And there's not a whole lot of science in that. It's about learning and continuing to learn. And we cannot keep looking at her story and his story as the only marked movement of what we need to do and get to do next. We get to make some new her story. It's time.
It's time.
It's
It
time.
is.
It's
It's
time to
time for
heal
us. Yeah.
and continue to have conversations.
Thank you.
And here's a point I will leave you with. But I remember when my ex-husband told me that my voice, I want to get the words, I don't want to get the gist. The sound of my voice sounded like a snake. And he said it made him think of venom that I was spewing. And he said, I remember him covering his ears, and he said, I cannot stand the sound of your voice. Stop talking. That's what he said to me. He did this, and those were the words verbatim, and I quote, I cannot stand the sound of your voice. Damn, stop talking. Shut up. And I remember that. It doesn't harm me anymore. But in this context, I'm using that as an example, that I'm talking all about the voice, a woman's voice with you even today. The healing that I had to do took years from that. And that's not everything else, but just that alone came up quite frequently when I was trying to heal from my limbs. Stop talking. The sound of your voice makes me think of all of that. And it would play in my mind, Toni, repeatedly. Yeah. So now what I do with my voice is use it everywhere I can. And do you know, he is the only person I've ever met that doesn't like the actual sound of my voice. So see, that has nothing to do with me. And women get to learn that about themselves. It doesn't have to do. And so even in that gentle moment where there was a silent shift, I said, no, I don't have to respond, because I'm okay with the sound of my voice and what comes with, because I literally make a living off the sound of my voice.
Your voice.
So I know my voice is just fine.
Thank you so much.
We get to choose to do something very